Welcome to the read along of Chapter 6, Lesson 2. Why did people in the past migrate to the West? New arrivals in the West. Europeans spent many trips exploring North America. It wasn't until the 1600s and 1700s, however, that they began to settle in the western part of North America. Sometimes they lived in peace with the Native Americans. Often, they did not. In 1741, Russian traders from Siberia sailed across the Pacific Ocean to what is now Alaska. Soon, Russia fur traders and their families had settled on this land. By 1799, the Russian government claimed the land. Alaska was part of Russia until 1867. In the 1700s, the Spanish created the mission system in what is now Mexico, California, and the American Southwest. They claimed the land and tried to spread their religious beliefs to the Native Americans. English explorer James Cook landed in the Hawaiian Islands in 1778. Cook and his crew did not treat the native Hawaiians well. In 1779, fighting broke out between the Hawaiians and Cook and his crew. Cook was killed in the struggle. More people come to the West. When the United States purchased the Louisiana Territory from France in 1803, the nation doubled in size. After Lewis and Clark explored the land, many people began moving west over this new territory. They were looking for land to claim and settle. To travel the long road to the West Coast, travelers faced illness and hunger. They had to cross rivers and the tall, rugged Rocky Mountains. To get safely through these hazards, many travelers relied on American fur trappers and traders called mountain men to guide them. They used trails that had originally been made by Native Americans. There were several routes west. Most trails began in Missouri. The Oregon Trail passed northwest through the Nebraska Territory to the Oregon Territory. In the Rocky Mountains, the California Trail split from the Oregon Trail. It led west to California. The Santa Fe Trail followed a southern route to Santa Fe in what is now New Mexico. The Mormon Trail began at Nauvoo, Illinois, where the Mormon Church was then based. Their church leader, Brigham Young, led a small group west to the shores of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. Thousands of Mormons followed. Landmarks along the trails helped travelers know they were on the right track and how far they had traveled. Independence Rock was one of the major landmarks of the Oregon Trail. This huge rock rises from the plains in Wyoming. It is about as tall as a 12-story building. Over time, people began carving their names into the rock as they passed by. People who came later would look at the names of those who knew to see if they had a person that far out west. James P. Beckwourth. James Beckwourth was born into slavery in Virginia around 1798. Beckwourth's father was white and his mother was an enslaved African American. Beckwourth was adventurous and dreamed of exploring other lands. He fulfilled that dream as an adult. Beckwourth joined a group of fur trappers in 1823. They set out to explore the West, but in 1828, the Crow people captured Beckwourth. As a captive, he became friends with the Crow. They taught him wilderness survival skills, which allowed him to explore paths to the West. Beckwourth used his knowledge of the wilderness to guide others to California. In 1850, he discovered a path through the Sierra Nevada to California. The Beckwourth Path is named after him. The Gold Rush. People have mined for minerals in the West for a long time. Native Americans mined metals and stones such as turquoise long before Europeans arrived. In 1848, California and the rest of the West went through a big change because of the discovery of gold. In January 1848, a worker found a small bit of gold in a creek at Sutter's Mill near Sacramento, California. When word got out, large numbers of people traveled to California. They came from the eastern United States. They also came from places around the world, such as China, Europe, and South America. All of them hoped to find gold. People hoped to become rich in the California gold rush. By 1849, about 80,000 gold miners, called 49ers, had arrived in California. 5 years later, more than 250,000 people lived in California. About $2 billion in gold was mined from the area during the gold rush years. Before the gold rush, California population was almost entirely Native American and Spanish. When people from many different backgrounds arrived, it caused conflict. The Native Americans who lived in the region were quickly outnumbered by the large number of newly arriving miners. These miners claimed the land and drove Native Americans from it. In some cases, the miners forced Native Americans to work for them. Boom towns. Soon, people were mining in other places in the West. They went to Colorado to mine gold and silver. Nevada had mines for gold, silver, copper, and lead. Idaho had gold, zinc, and lead mines. Many people lived in camps while they mined. In the first mining camps, people lived in tents or shacks. They did not have enough time to build houses. Conflict among the miners grew as the camps became crowded. They frequently fought. So many people moved to these areas that it was settled before towns with governments and laws could develop. The camps became known for being lawless. Many mining camps grew quickly into boom towns. They were called this because the population of the town grew so quickly. Merchants moved to the boom town to make money profiting by providing goods and services specifically to miners. For example, Levi Strauss, a Jewish immigrant from Germany, created blue jeans as tough work pants to sell to the miners. Some boom towns grew into cities. San Francisco was a small port town before the gold rush. However, most boom towns disappeared as the mines were depleted. People moved on, leaving the towns with their buildings still standing. These towns became ghost towns. Nobody wanted to live there once there was nothing left to mine. Transportation and communication. In the mid-1800s, stagecoaches moved people, mail, and money through the West. A stagecoach was a horse-drawn enclosed carriage. It had scheduled stops, or stages, where the horses were changed. The driver sat atop the carriage. Passengers sat inside. Roads were not paved, so a stagecoach ride was often very bumpy and uncomfortable. A fast trip from St. Louis to San Francisco by stagecoach took about 25 days. The Pony Express helped swiftly deliver mail and small packages to people in the West. Pony Express services began in 1860. Its route of about 190 stations stretched from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California. Riders carried the mail on horseback at top speed from one station to another, about 10 to 15 miles. At each station, a new rider and horse carried the mail on to the next station. The Pony Express only lasted about 18 months. It was soon replaced by the telegraph and the railroad. The telegraph provided fast, long-distance communication. It quickly sent coded messages over electrical wires. Many telegraph lines were already railroad lines. In 1861, the Western Union Telegraph Company completed the first telegraph line connecting the East Coast to the West Coast. A dangerous job. Charlie Pankhurst worked for a stagecoach company called Wells Fargo. Being a stagecoach driver was dangerous and hard work. Drivers had to be tough. Stagecoach companies only hired men who were willing to risk their lives. Pankhurst was bold, daring, and able to navigate many difficult routes. Experienced drivers such as Pankhurst were called whips. Whips skillfully handled their six-ups, or six horses. It took strength to steer the horses safely. It wasn't until after his death that many people found out that Charlie Pankhurst was a woman named Charlotte Pankhurst. In their words, Charlie was a great whip, and when he pulled into the old Nebraska house with a beautifully equipped 20-passenger Concord coach drawn by 6 Mustangs at Mettlesome a quarter horse, it was an inspiring scene indeed. How deftly he, with his right hand, whirled the belly of the 6-horse lash around the stock and carefully laid it upon the deck above his head, all conscious of the onlookers, and he wrapped the lines around the foothold of the brake. He would hand from one to the boot, transfer the mail, or perhaps some venturesome female who insisted on riding with the driver. The Transcontinental Railroad. With so many people moving west, the nation needed a transcontinental railroad system. Transcontinental means that it would cross the continent. The Central Pacific Railroad began laying tracks in Sacramento, building east. The Union Pacific Railroad began its work in Omaha, Nebraska, and built west. The companies planned to meet somewhere in the middle. The Union Pacific laid most of its track on the Great Plains. The Central Pacific had to lay its track through the Sierra Nevada, the range of mountains on California's eastern border. This meant blasting long tunnels through solid rock. Then workers had to lay track through the desert to the east of the Sierra Nevada. The construction of the railroad threatened the way of life of many Native Americans along the way. Some groups tried to stop the work. In rare cases, Native Americans attacked railroad workers. In 1869, 2 companies met at Promontory Summit in northern Utah. The Transcontinental Railroad was complete when railroad officials drove one final golden spike to connect the tracks. Railroad workers. Railroad workers faced long hours and dangerous conditions. Many immigrants were hired for the job. The Central Pacific Railroad hired Chinese immigrants. Chinese immigrants were known as hard workers, but they were treated poorly. They were given the most dangerous jobs and paid less. The Union Pacific hired former Civil War soldiers, some Mormons, and many Irish immigrants. Irish workers were not treated as poorly as the Chinese, but they were still paid less than the other workers. Chinese immigrants worked in many industries. One such immigrant was Li Chu. Chu started working in a laundry when he first arrived. Then he opened his own laundry and worked for the Pacific Railroad Company. In their words of Li Chu, work in a laundry begins early on Monday morning around 7 o'clock. Each work only about 5 days a week, but those are long days from 7 o'clock in the morning till midnight.